I want to talk about discovering the God-given supernatural gifts in your life and developing those, all right? So, it's very important that we understand we need God's involvement, okay? Lesson 7. In this lesson, we're going to talk about discovering your gift. I want to open up with a passage out of the Message paraphrase, and this is Galatians 4 and 5, or excuse me, 6, 4 and 5. Make a careful exploration of who you are and the work you have been given, and then sink yourself into that. Don't be impressed with yourself. Don't compare yourself with others. Each of you must take responsibility for doing the creative best you can with your own life. Wow, there's a mouthful in that. Matter of fact, it's going to take 2 lessons to talk about those 2 verses of Scripture. I want to talk about, in this specific lesson, make a careful exploration of the work you have been given. It's not my intent to talk to you about developing natural abilities. If we practice hard enough, anybody can get proficient at just about anything except for me in singing. That's the one thing I really struggle with. I remember, actually, musical instruments. I took piano lessons from a very well-known piano teacher in our community, and she worked full-time. She was brilliant, and she worked with me 4 years, and I was the only student she ever went to the parents and said, "Would you please let your son quit?" So when it comes to musical abilities, it comes to singing, I'm just not going to quite get there. But most people, if you practice something for hours and hours and hours, you can get proficient. This is not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about discovering the God-given supernatural gifts in your life and developing those, all right? So, it's very important that we understand we need God's involvement, okay? Our personal relationship with Jesus Christ is just that. It's personal. And I can't teach you how to discover and identify your personal gift, and I don't think really anybody can. I never would have discovered that I have the ability to write had God not spoken to me that morning in prayer, because my teachers told me I couldn't write. The SAT told me I couldn't write. I even had a college student criticize my paper that I wrote in college. I was the only, because the professor had the students critique one another's. Everybody's was positive, except mine got criticized. Okay? So I never, ever would have discovered that I had the gift to write had God not spoken to me that morning in prayer. On the other hand, if you look at David, he's out watching the sheep and he's living life, and here comes a bear. And he kills the bear as a young man. And then on another night, here comes a lion. And he kills the lion. Well, what did that lead him to? He goes to the battlefield and all the soldiers are hiding. And he says, the God who gave me the lion and the bear will give me that Philistine. And he kills the Philistine. What did David discover? That God had given him a gift of being a mighty warrior. Okay, so that one he stumbled into. You might stumble in, or you might hear God speak to you like he did to me on right. But either way, it takes a seeking of God in order to discover and develop our gifts. So square one, it's critical to seek out and believe for God's involvement in discovering our charisma. God, the Bible says in Hebrews 11:6, rewards those who diligently seek Him in faith. He does not reward those who casually seek Him in wonder and doubt. Jesus makes a statement. He said, keep on asking and you will receive. Listen to the words. Keep on asking and you will receive what you ask for. Keep on seeking and you will find. Now, is God just kind of being mean and holding things back and saying, when you pray long enough, then I'm going to give it to you? No, He's not that way. Don't ever think that way. He wants that desire to be so strong in you that you appreciate what He gives you. Let me give you an example. When I was in high school, I loved, and I mean loved, astronomy. I wanted so bad to have a telescope, to be able to look at the night sky. And I remember, I didn't have a lot of money. I was an assistant tennis pro for a swim and racket club and just doing my job, but I wasn't making the kind of money you could get to buy a telescope. But I just kept checking out astronomy books from the library. I'd check 4 or 5 out at a time, and I'd read those astronomy books, and I'd bring them back to the library. And I took a course. I took a course in our high school. We actually had a semester of astronomy that was an elective. And between the magazines and the course, my desire is so passionate to have a telescope. It forced me to think creatively. And I remember I thought, here I am, the tennis pro at the swim and racket club. Why don't I give fall lessons after school, private lessons? And you got a lot of money back in those days for doing private lessons. And I went to the board, and the board said, we're fine with that. So I sent out a flyer to all the people in the neighborhood, and I said, I'm going to give private tennis lessons. Do you know I made enough money to buy a very high-powered scope? And I look back at that and I think, what if somebody would have just went out and bought that scope for me? I probably would have taken it for granted. I probably would have misused it. I probably would have gotten tired of it quickly. But when I had my hard-earned desire in that scope, I really appreciate it. This is the way God is. He's saying, keep on asking, because He wants the desire to grow in you so you don't take it for granted. So, let's talk about locating our gifts through seeking God. First of all, there are things that we can do in the natural that will help us to be able to identify our charisma. First of all, ask the right questions. We should ask the right questions, not only for ourselves, but others. And we're not looking for the answer of man. We're looking to hear God's voice in voices. So in particularly, let's talk to the right people. Now, there are 2 types of groups that you want to avoid when you're asking questions. First group are those who are just going to tell you what you want to hear. Okay? Don't ask questions of those people. They're just going to tell you what you want to hear, not what you need to hear. The second group is the pessimistic people. Oh, I don't think you could ever write a book. That's ridiculous. Don't talk to those people. You want to talk to a father or mother in the faith, somebody that's traveled that road before you, somebody who is a man or woman of faith, not a person who will instill doubt. I had so many people to try to discourage me from writing. There are many who are wise, but they lack the eternal view. Okay, now let me say, these are like the unsaved people. Can I tell you, I ask them questions. Now, I only take their advice to a certain level, because I realize, hey, they're not born again, they don't have the eternal view, but I realize they've got a lot of insight into that particular field, and I'm going to ask them questions as well, okay? An example would be, hey, you feel like you're supposed to be an architect, go talk to an architect, whether he's saved or not saved. But if he's not saved, doesn't have the eternal view, only take it to a certain level. Parents, spouses, pastors, all should be good people we should ask these questions to help us discover our charisma. Now, there are exceptions. When I look at my dad, thank God he's in heaven right now, but my dad at the time was not saved. He was a stickler for security. And I remember my dad made a comment to me, John, you need a good career that's going to be a safe career that's going to pay you well. That's why you should be an engineer. So I went into engineering and I hated it. 4 years, I absolutely hated it. I remember my boss, my first boss, pulled me into his office and he said, Bevere, I was working for a company as an engineer. He said, you're no engineer. Look at engineers. They love science. They love designing and building things. You're terrible at it. You're a people person. And here I had allowed my dad's words to shape those 4 years. That's why I've been so careful with our sons not to say anything that's going to divert them away from what God has called them to do. I remember Alex saying to my wife, Mom, what am I called to do? And she said, God, this is such a crucial moment. What do I say to him? And God said, just tell him, Alec, what you're called to do is so magnificent that I don't think we've even seen it yet. And that was her answer to this young teenage boy who was asking her. So, some of the good questions we should ask ourselves or those people we go to, what are we naturally good at? I mean, a lot of times that can help us to locate our charisma. This is a good starting place. Let me say that, all right? Perhaps you're really good with numbers, or you're really good with the physical body. Maybe you're called to healthcare. If you're really good with numbers, you're called to a science profession or an engineering degree. But that can't be the final determiner. I was a good tennis player. I played varsity tennis at Purdue. I played Junior Davis Cup. I played the United States Tennis Association circuit. I won the state high school. I was a very good tennis player. But I knew as I sought God diligently, I wasn't called to be on the USTA circuit. I have a friend, on the other hand. His name is Aaron Badley. He and I have been friends for over 15 years. We were like brothers, and he plays on the PGA Tour. And I remember it was his second year on the PGA. I believe the year was 2004, and he was really struggling. And I remember he was staying at my house for a tournament here in the Colorado area. He missed the cut. I was getting ready to go do a conference in Las Vegas. I said, hey, why don't you come with me to the conference? He went with me to the conference. The power and the presence of God hit him so strong. After the conference, I said, Aaron, did God speak to you? And he said, yes, he did. 4 times God told me, I haven't called you to preach, I've called you to play golf on a full-time basis. What Aaron was doing is he was trying to work it out where he would do engagements, because he wanted to do what I did. He wanted to do speaking engagements half the time and golf half the time, but he wanted to put more emphasis. He repented of that night, and do you know, within 2 years, he became number 16 in the whole world, and he has won 4 PGA events since, and he has been on the tour for 15 years, and he has reached so many people in that arena of the PGA Tour. I look at my friend. I've got a friend who pastors a church, and he had a guy in his church that just had an amazing gift of taking care of cars. He was good at it. And he had a small business, a couple garages, and was operating in it. But he had an offer to teach the Bible on a full-time basis as a teaching pastor at a large church across town. He took his pastor to lunch. He said, I'm going to take this job. My pastor friend said, man, I just don't see this in my heart. I really see you working on cars. You have an amazing gift. He said, no. He got mad and went over to the church the other side of the city. His finances started drying up. His marriage suffered. And God spoke to him a year later. He still hadn't gotten the full-time position of teaching the Bible in that church. And God said to him, I didn't call you to be a pastor on a staff teaching the Bible. I called you to fix cars and to teach the Bible in your local church. He came back to my friend. He repented. And you know what happened? A couple years later, God gave this man a dream. He saw a computer hooked up to a car, and he saw how he could diagnose the problem in the car through the computer. He got with a friend who understood computers. He said, can I do this? The friend said, yes. Can we do that? He said, yes. Can we do this? Yes. He invented a machine, this was years ago, that could diagnose the problem in a car without the mechanics having to rip it apart. This was revolutionary back in that days. Do you know that his invention was set up in garage shops all over that part of the region of the United States? He came up to his pastor a few years later and just laughed and said, Pastor, I know God has called me to fix cars. And so he still taught the Bible, don't get me wrong. Just like I still played tennis, but that wasn't my charisma. Are you getting what I'm saying? I hope you are. Let's talk about what energizes you. That's another indication of where your charisma is. You know, with me, when I'm writing, I lose track of time. When I'm speaking in a service, these sessions are so hard for me sometimes. I'm trying to keep it in a 15-minute time period. I'm always going over. Why? Because I love to preach the gospel. I'm energized by it. I remember my assistant asked me to do an energy test. -2 is what drains you. -1, it doesn't totally drain you, but you don't get energized. 1 means you get a little energized. 2 means you get totally energized by what you do. Man, for me, the 2 that totally energize me is preaching and writing. And I realized this is my charisma. This is what I'm called to do. Here's another good question to ask. What am I drawn to? This will help you discover what your charisma is. What grabs your interest? What causes you to come alive? You know, I watch some people, they sing, but they're worship leaders. I try to sing and people throw things at me. It's a labor for me. I realize it's not my charisma. Okay? I look at my dad. My dad, oh my goodness, he was an engineer for 40 years and he had the chance to go in management and he turned it down because he wanted to stay with the technical. I remember Saturday mornings where he would sit me down and show me how a steam boiler worked. And he would spend an hour drawing the whole thing up and telling me how it worked. And I'm bored to tears. I want to go play tennis. And my dad, I don't want to dishonor my dad, so I'm just sitting there watching him draw this boiler and telling me how it works. Then he looks at me, a couple Saturdays later, hey son, let me tell you how a steam engine works. And I'm like, oh my gosh, here we go again. He loved it. It was his gift, okay? What you're drawn to. What are you watching on YouTube? What are you drawn to as far as instructional videos? What do you get excited and passionate about when you start doing it? Chances are good you've tapped into your charisma. I know when I was in the serving ministry, I loved doing it. I loved serving my pastor. It energized me. I worked 70-hour weeks and didn't think anything of it because I was energized by serving my pastor. And so this is a very, very good thing to examine. Number 4, who are you drawn to? What people interest you? You know me, I love getting around ministers. I love talking to pastors. I love talking to other authors. Because why? It's my tribe. It's, if you look at, there's 12 tribes of Israel, right? They're all God's people, but they're different tribes. My tribe is people that communicate the Word of God. I can talk for hours. Sometimes I've found myself, and it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm still talking to pastors at a conference about what happened in the service, what God's doing through their life and their ministry. I'm energized by it. So who are the people that you're drawn to? I mean, if you're called, let's say, to be a surgeon, you'll probably find great stimulation in talking to other surgeons. You'll love learning about what they've experienced, what they've learned, what they've done. These are all indicators of the charisma that's on your life. There are so many things that I could say, and let me tell you this, if you're really getting something out of this, I really go into this in much more depth in the book Acts. I want to highly recommend that you get this book and you read it as a complement to this course. All right. Once you discovered your gift, now it's time to develop it. Remember, developing your gift causes you to rise. All right. Discovering your gift creates a path for you and brings you before great people. But when you listen carefully, when you develop your gift, it causes you to rise.